share my entire screen. Any good?
Yes, now it works. Thank you.
Okay. I suspect if I tab back to see the chat, though, you'll see that. Okay. So yeah, I'll go through this. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat, but if I miss the chat, because I can only see my presentation window now, then apologies. So let me give a background. So we are Clicks and Links. We're an SME, a small, medium-sized enterprise based in Manchester. So we focus especially on virtual reality and similar fields, or augmented reality and so on. So we're in the Manchester part of Triangulum, and specifically in the ICT part. So again, where every project has got mobility, energy and ICT, we are in the ICT part of the Manchester project, which is led by our friends at the University of Manchester, and it's effectively us and the University of Manchester running that stream. And the focus for the ICT stream in Manchester effectively is a few things, really. The University of Manchester is developing a sort of data hub of sorts. So they collect data from the other work streams in Manchester, the energy stream and the mobility stream, but also from other sources across Manchester. And they're interested in having this data hub as beyond this project as a source of research data for students and academics in the Manchester corridor area to have access to data for research purposes or anything else. So there's a data hub, and then we are Clicks and Links are creating what we call a visualization platform, which is basically a tool that allows you to visualize with a strong focus in the first version that we'll do in Triangulum on virtual reality, to visualize data. So we'll connect to the University of Manchester Data Hub to visualize data, but we're also interested in connecting to other sources of data in other projects that are also going on in Manchester. And then the third part of the ICT program, which is the most relevant for today, is the premise is we'll get data, we'll make it available visually, and then we want to try and encourage innovation using that data. And the tools that we've created in the visualization platform. And so that's the heart of this this presentation today. So the early in the bid, the rough idea was that we'd make this data available and copy from hackathons and things like that. And so here I'll share with you some of the things we've learned in the first couple of years about how we think we'll do this. So we've deliberately called this enabling data-driven innovation, because the focus of our work is not to look at all types of innovation. Because we're in the ICT stream, we're interested in data-driven innovation. So in other words, there might be some great innovative ideas that have nothing to do with data and nothing to do with ICT. And that's great, but that's not the focus of our work. We're interested in how data especially can enable certain innovations. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a, let me make sure there are no questions. Okay. Hopefully that gives you some context. So there aren't many slides I'll talk to. So here's a summary. So we're using the Innovation Challenge, which is this third part of the Manchester Triangulum ICT project within Manchester to discover how to encourage more data-enabled solutions to city issues and opportunities. And I'll explore each of those points hopefully in the next few slides. So data-enabled solutions, I've covered that briefly, and then city issues and opportunities, I'll cover that a bit. So some key lessons in the first year or so. What we did is looked at a lot of hackathon and similar sort of technology-based innovation processes. So there's links here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you're welcome to follow these links later when the slides are shared, where some of these things came from. So there were more sources we looked at. I think there's 4 that I've put up here. That are some of the summary points. So this first one, we looked at, so New York has been running something called the Big Apps contest for a number of years. I can't remember how long, but I think it's maybe 4 or 5 years. And this was a quote that says, the problem with the New York Big Apps contest is that it leaves both user needs and likely user behavior out of the equation, instead beginning with an enormous data dump and asking developers to make something cool out of it. So again, this is one of the critiques we see a lot of hackathons, that too often it can be characterized as, here's a load of data, we'll get a load of techies in the room and we'll give them loads of pizza and then we'll hope that some magic happens, basically. And so, you know, that sort of has become a quite accepted critique, that that's not the way to do it. And, you know, here's a source that sort of goes along that line. The other point in here about user behavior, I think there was a previous winner of the New York Big Apps contest that effectively was a car parking app. So basically it would take all of the data around car park availability and make it available in a nifty app. But this app needed you to click buttons while you were driving, so it wasn't perhaps the best sort of design, really, and so that sort of is what the user behavior point is trying to get at. So that was a key lesson. Just dumping data is not enough to get innovation, basically. A clear understanding of the problem is the second point here. So again, this was looking at some work that Boston in the States had done, and they'd actually responded to some of the weaknesses in their processes and what they'd identified before, and they'd said, right, we need to define a problem rather than just saying, here's a load of data, please come up with ideas to our city's challenges. They actually framed some problems, and what they got, according to this source, again, you can follow these up later, is they got what this source says was a lot better high quality solutions, but it was driven by, you know, some defined problems at the start. Let me just tab back, make sure there are no questions. That's okay. Third and fourth points just to share here of our lessons that informed how we're trying to approach data-enabled innovation. So the lack of citizens being engaged in is a sort of widely accepted problem now. And again, this quote said, residents know a huge amount about their cities, and tapping into this collective intelligence should both help the city better define the problems that matter most to residents, as well as generate innovative solutions. So again, it might seem obvious this, but sometimes that hasn't happened a lot in the past. Sometimes it has been, you know, these hackathons just run with a limited group of technical people and so on, and so, you know, there's no surprise that maybe, I think one of the things we see is that some of the most highly used technology apps and so on in cities seem to be transport apps, you know, so finding train times and bus times, and maybe that's because the people who are developing these apps, you know, will they also use the buses and the trains, so the user and the citizen and the tech developer is all the same person, but maybe we're missing out on loads of other things because we're not engaging citizens. And the last point is basically thinking about how you manage this in an ongoing way. So this is something we don't really have an answer to, and I won't go into answers in this, but we've sort of looked into thinking how do you make these processes sustainable. One of the things, that there's a system called Fix My Street, and again you can follow the links to this later, that basically allows people anyone to locate on a map, you know, whether there's a pothole or there's graffiti, and citizens can flag these things on a map, a normal sort of Google Maps, and that can be a source of data that can get reported and so on. But what you seem to see with these sorts of applications is, for starters, a pretty limited group of people who use them, and too often you can see a sort of tailing off, a reduction over time as to how people engage with them. And so thinking through that sort of ongoing engagements, you know, whether it's incentives, whether it's greater support, you know, that's something that needs considering. But, you know, to manage your expectations, we don't necessarily have the answers to that at the moment. but we might have as we run this process over the next 2 or 3 years. So we came to a view after this research that we think data-enabled innovation requires support across the following 3 components. So if data-enabled solutions is in the middle, we think you need to focus on how you identify and capture city issues and opportunities, then how you make data available, again because this is about data-enabled innovation. So how you make data available to encourage those solutions, and then how you provide this supporting process to connect the two. I had a pause, sorry, but there's no questions. So just to go through each of those, and this is the last part here, just watching the time, I'll go through each of those 3 bubbles briefly. And this first one is the one that we're doing the most to try and explore what we think is something interesting. What we're interested, so we are going to run 2 processes innovation challenges a year, with the first one in sort of July-ish, and the second one sort of later, October, November this year. So again, we haven't done these yet, we're planning for them at the moment. We will define, in the first one, we as a project will define the challenges. But for the second one, what we want to do is something that we think is quite interesting. We're interested in how we can capture citizen experiences and use those citizen experiences to help frame or identify problems. So we're looking to work with an external company. You can see the link here to some of their work, and what they have is a tool that allows you to define a geographical area, which for us would be all or part of the Manchester corridor, and basically to frame a set of questions which allow anyone who has internet access in that area to then place responses, and those questions can be quantitative and qualitative, simple text through to scoring of high, likely and very likely and Likert scales and so on. And so we haven't defined this at the moment, but as an example, on a simple level, we could just say, how happy or sad are you at the moment? And that could be then a source of data that we can leave that running for several weeks, probably, maybe a month. And we'll then have a data source that sees where in the corridor and also when citizens are happy and sad, and we can then map that data or make that data available with other source of data we have in the University of Manchester Data Hub around weather and air quality and traffic patterns and so on. And that then potentially becomes an interesting way to say, well, let's frame our questions as to why are citizens sad in this part of the corridor at this time, and try and also almost discover it. So again, we haven't clarified exactly how we'll run this, whether we invite some of those citizens into this process or not, or whether we do it as a follow-up is not defined. But we think this idea of ground-up citizen experiences is something quite interesting, at least worthy of research. Then the second and third points from that diagram before. So we will run workshops. As I said, there'll be two workshops this year. They could be defined as hackathons, but they effectively make the data available and encourage the right sorts of people. And the first one, we're thinking maybe we focus it on technology SMEs, but maybe we focus it on student groups, again, because we're with the University of Manchester. So again, that's to be defined, and in all likelihood we'll do one of each, I think. We'll make available the visualization platform, which the image on the right is a screen grab of the visualization platform. So people interact with that using, in this case, the HTC Vive, and that's a map of the picture underneath of the Manchester corridor with different data sets in. And what we'll do, our process is we'll sort of do a day-long session where we explain what data is available, explain the challenges, and we're going to encourage people who come up with the best ideas, which will just be probably posters or flip charts or presentations. We'll then explain how we will judge those different ideas, and by the end of the week we'll look to make an award for a winning idea to then develop their idea further, and we can provide some support. It's complicated a bit by EU tendering rules, so Manchester City Council own this budget, and so there will probably have to be, we've learned from Eindhoven on this, that I think we have to go through a procurement to provide some funding to allow this the idea to be developed. And I think that's it. Apologies if I took a little bit too long, but happy to take any questions. So I can see a question. So can you summarise what could be done to incentivise citizens to participate in these hackathons and sustain this participation over time? Well, I'll take that part first. So in our case, for the first instance, we'll target groups, we think. So if it's technology SMEs, we will publicise it locally around the local sort of technology groups and so on, and encourage people to come that way. And we have an incentive which is not an enormous incentive given the budget we've got, but we'll have about £5,000 sterling, I think it is, to allow someone to develop their idea a bit further, and we can then also provide support to them over the period where they develop this idea. So that's how we anticipate doing it in the first case. In the longer term, I'm not sure, as I said at the start, I think that's a challenge for cities really, you know, whether you manage these things through existing processes, and you have, the way New York does it is they have a big prize.